The night Selena Harrow carried a dying child through a blizzard that killed grown men, she stopped being invisible. But that same storm would bring a sickness that nearly destroyed everyone she'd fought to save, and force a scarred rancher to choose between the elegant woman from his past and the cook nobody thought deserved love. This is a story about courage nobody expected, kindness nobody valued, and a woman who proved that the strongest hearts often come in the bodies the world underestimates most. If this story moves you, hit that like button and drop a comment with your city. I want to see how far Selena's journey travels across the world. The bread was burning. Selena Harrow smelled it before she saw the smoke curling from the cast iron stove, black tendrils rising toward the low ceiling of her cabin like accusatory fingers. She lunged forward, yanking the pan off the heat with a rag already singed from yesterday's mistake, and the loaves tumbled onto her workbench in a charred heap. "Damn it," she whispered. Then louder, because there was nobody to hear her anyway. "Damn it, damn it, damn it." 3 hours of work. Ruined. Again. Outside, the wind screamed through Black Hollow like something alive and furious, rattling the loose boards on her cabin walls and sending snow spiraling past her single frosted window. February 1891 had arrived with teeth bared, and it wasn't letting go. The kind of cold that made your lungs ache, the kind that killed people who didn't respect it. Selena pressed her flour-dusted hands against the workbench and tried to breathe through the tightness in her chest. She couldn't afford this. Couldn't afford to waste the flour, the salt, the firewood it took to heat the stove. Mrs. Pritchard at the general store had given her credit exactly twice, and both times the woman's eyes had traveled down Selena's body with that particular look, the one that said, "You eat too much of your own cooking, girl." "I'll make it work," Selena muttered, scraping the burned crusts off with a knife. "They won't even notice." They always noticed. She was 28 years old, and she'd been alone since her mother died 3 winters back. No husband, no family, no prospects, as the church ladies liked to remind her when they thought she couldn't hear. Just Selena and this drafty cabin at the edge of town, surviving on whatever coins she could scrape together from selling bread, stew, and the occasional pie to folks who pitied her more than they respected her. The heavy girl in the smoke cabin. That's what they called her. She'd heard it whispered at the Sunday market, seen it in the way men's eyes slid past her like she was furniture. She wrapped the salvaged bread in cloth and set it aside, then moved to the pot of venison stew bubbling on the stove. At least that smelled right, rich and earthy, with wild onions and the last of her dried herbs. If she was lucky, Mr. Calhoun would trade her a half-pound of coffee for a quart of it. If she was unlucky, he'd wrinkle his nose and offer her 2 turnips instead. The wind howled again, harder this time, and something heavy slammed against the side of her cabin. Selena froze. It came again. Not the wind. A fist pounding on her door. Her heart kicked in her chest. Nobody came out here after dark. Nobody had reason to. She wiped her hands on her apron and crossed the small room, her boots creaking on the uneven floorboards. "Who's there?" "Need shelter." A man's voice, rough and low. "Storm's getting worse." Selena's hand hovered over the door latch. Every instinct her mother had beaten into her screamed, "Don't open it." Strange men, dark nights, a woman alone. Nothing good came from that combination, but the wind was picking up, rattling the shutters, and she could hear the desperation underneath the gruffness in his voice. She'd heard it before in her own. She opened the door 6 inches, keeping her boot braced against the base. The man on her steps was tall enough to block out the swirling snow behind him, broad-shouldered and wrapped in a heavy canvas coat crusted with ice. His hat was pulled low, shadowing his face, but she could see the hard line of his jaw, the scar that cut through his left eyebrow, the frost clinging to his dark beard. "You alone?" he asked. "Does it matter?" His mouth twitched. Might have been a smile, hard to tell. "Fair point. What do you want?" "Told you. Shelter. Horse threw a shoe 2 miles back. Can't make it to the ranch in this." He jerked his head toward the storm. "I can pay." Selena looked past him. She could barely see 3 feet beyond her doorstep through the driving snow, but she caught the dark shape of a horse tied to her fence post, head down against the wind. "How much?" "$1." She blinked. $1 was 2 weeks of bread sales. Maybe 3. "Half now," she said. He reached into his coat without argument and pulled out a silver coin, pressing it into her palm. His hand was rough, scarred across the knuckles. and cold enough that she flinched. Selena stepped back and opened the door. The man had to duck to clear the frame. Once inside, he straightened, and she realized exactly how much space he took up. The cabin that felt empty with just her in it suddenly felt crowded, the air thicker. He smelled like leather and wood smoke and horses, and when he pushed his hat back, she saw his eyes, pale gray, the color of a winter sky before snow. "You got a name?" she asked. Boone Callahan. The words hit her like a slap. She'd heard that name before. Everyone in Black Hollow had. Boone Callahan ran the biggest cattle ranch in the valley, a brutal stretch of land up in the mountains where only the toughest men survived. People said he was as mean as the country he worked, that he'd killed a man once in a dispute over water rights, that he ran his ranch hands harder than the cattle. Selena swallowed. "I know who you are." "That a problem? Should it be?" He studied her for a long moment, then shrugged out of his coat and hung it on the peg by the door. Underneath, his shirt was damp with sweat and melted snow, clinging to shoulders that looked like they could break fence posts. "You got coffee?" he asked. "Got stew. That'll do." Selena ladled out a bowl with shaking hands and set it on the table. Boone sat down without ceremony, pulled the bowl close, and ate like a man who'd forgotten his last meal. No politeness, no small talk, just steady, mechanical efficiency. She stood by the stove and watched him, unsure what else to do. Her mother had taught her to be useful, to stay quiet, to never draw attention. But this man, this rancher, filled her cabin like he owned it, and she didn't know how to be invisible when someone was looking right at her. "You made this?" he asked, not looking up. "Yes. It's good." 2 words. Flat, matter of fact, but something in Selena's chest loosened anyway. "Thank you." He finished the bowl and set it down, leaning back in the chair. It creaked under his weight. "You live here alone?" "Yes." "That's safe?" "Safe as anywhere." Boone's eyes traveled around the cabin, the sagging shelves, the patched curtains, the stack of firewood that wouldn't last another week. When his gaze came back to her, she saw him doing the math, saw him seeing what everyone else saw. A woman too big, too plain, too poor to matter. But he didn't say it, he just nodded. "Storm's not stopping tonight," he said. "I'll sleep on the floor. Pay you another $1 in the morning." "You don't have to." "I do." Selena fetched him a blanket from her trunk, the good wool one her mother had woven, and handed it over. Boone spread it on the floor by the stove without complaint, using his coat as a pillow. She retreated to her bed in the corner, pulling the thin quilt up to her chin, and listened to the wind scream outside. The cabin was warmer with him in it, not just from the body heat, though that helped. Something else. Something she couldn't name. "Miss," Boone said into the darkness. "Yes?" "You got work?" The question caught her off guard. "I sell bread, sometimes stew." "That paying enough?" "It's paying." "That's not what I asked." Selena stared at the ceiling. The truth sat heavy on her tongue, sour and familiar. "No, it's not." Silence. Then, "I need a cook." Her heart stopped. "What?" "At the ranch. Got 15 men up there. Most of them can't boil water without burning it. Need someone who knows what they're doing." She didn't know what to say, didn't know if this was real or some kind of joke. "Why me?" "You can cook? I need a cook. Seems simple. There are other women in town. Better—" "I'm not asking them." Selena sat up, the quilt falling to her lap. In the dim glow of the dying stove, she could just make out Boone's profile, his arm tucked under his head. "Mr. Callahan, I appreciate the offer, but you don't want it?" "It's not that." "Then what?" The words came out before she could stop them. "No man marries a fat woman, sir. And I don't imagine many want one cooking in their bunkhouse either." The bluntness of it hung in the air like smoke. Selena's face burned. She'd said the quiet part out loud, the thing everyone thought but nobody ever said to her face. Boone didn't laugh, didn't dismiss it. He just rolled onto his back and stared at the ceiling. "I'm not looking for a wife," he said finally. "I'm looking for someone who can feed men that work 16 hours a day in weather that'll kill you if you blink wrong. Someone who can make exhausted cowboys remember why they're still breathing instead of lying down in the snow and giving up." He turned his head toward her. Even in the darkness, she could feel the weight of his gaze. You think you can do that? Selena's throat tightened. Nobody had ever asked her what she could do, only what she couldn't. Yes, she whispered. Then pack your things. We leave at first light. And sleep didn't come easy. Selena lay in the dark, listening to Boone's steady breathing and the wind battering the walls, and tried to make sense of what had just happened. A job. A real job. Not scraping by on charity bread and pity coins, but actual work with actual pay. At a ranch full of men. In the mountains. Miles from anywhere. Her stomach twisted. What if she failed? What if the men hated her cooking, or worse, hated her? What if Boone took one look at her trying to haul firewood or work a kitchen built for someone stronger and faster and regretted the offer? What if this is a mistake? But staying here was a mistake too. A slow one. The kind that killed you by inches, winter after winter, until you woke up 50 years old and realized you'd spent your whole life waiting for permission to exist. When the first gray light crept through the window, Boone was already awake, rolling up his blanket with the brisk efficiency of a man used to moving before dawn. You ready? He asked. Selena had packed everything she owned into a single battered trunk and a canvas bag. Clothes, her mother's cookbook, a few cooking tools, the blanket Boone had used. It wasn't much. It fit in the back of his wagon like it was nothing. The storm had passed, leaving Black Hollow buried under fresh snow that glittered in the weak morning sun. Boone's horse stood patient and calm as he hitched it to the wagon, breath steaming in the frozen air. Selena climbed onto the bench seat, her hands clutching the edge so hard her knuckles went white. She'd never left Black Hollow, never been more than 5 miles from the cabin where she was born. Boone swung up beside her, taking the reins in one scarred hand. You change your mind. Now's the time to say so. She looked back at her cabin. The crooked door, the smoke-stained walls, the place that had never quite felt like home, even when her mother was alive. I'm not changing my mind. Good. He snapped the reins, and the wagon lurched forward. Black Hollow disappeared behind them, swallowed by trees and snow, and Selena didn't look back. The ranch was 2 days north by wagon, Boone told her. 2 days through country that got rougher and colder with every mile. They stopped only to rest the horse and eat, hard biscuits and dried meat that Boone pulled from his saddlebag without comment. He didn't talk much, didn't ask her questions or make small talk to fill the silence. At first it made Selena nervous. She kept waiting for him to say something, to explain what he expected, to give her some indication of what waited at the end of this journey. But as the hours passed, the silence stopped feeling uncomfortable and started feeling like relief. No judgment, no scrutiny, just the creak of the wagon, the steady rhythm of hooves, and the endless white landscape rolling past. On the second day, as they climbed higher into the mountains, Boone finally spoke. You know how to handle ranch hands? Selena blinked. No. They're going to test you, push back, see if you break. What should I do? Don't break? She almost laughed. That's it? That's your advice? That's all there is. He glanced at her sidelong. You ever been around men who work hard? I've been around men who think they work hard. This time Boone did smile. Just a flicker, gone almost before she saw it. Fair enough. They crested a ridge just as the sun was starting to dip toward the horizon, and Selena saw it. Callahan Ranch sprawled across a valley like something out of a fever dream. The main house was a long, low structure built from rough-cut timber, surrounded by barns, corrals, and bunkhouses that looked like they'd been hammered together by men too tired to care about straight lines. Smoke rose from a dozen chimneys. Cattle dotted the distant fields like dark stones scattered across snow. It was huge, chaotic, alive in a way Black Hollow had never been. That's home, Boone said. Home. The word felt strange in Selena's mouth. She didn't say it out loud. As they rolled into the yard, men appeared from the barns and bunkhouses, drawn by the sound of the wagon. They were exactly what Selena expected. Rough, weathered, layered in canvas and leather and suspicion. They watched her climb down from the wagon like she was a puzzle they hadn't figured out yet. Who's this? One of them called out, a wiry man with a limp and a face like old boot leather. New cook, Boone said, swinging her trunk down from the wagon. Name's Selena Harrow. A ripple of muttering went through the men. Selena caught fragments. Woman? Her? Serious? We don't need a cook, someone said from the back of the group. Boone set the trunk down and turned, slow and deliberate. You eating your own meals now, Carter? Silence.
Didn't think so. Boone jerked his head toward the main house. She starts tomorrow. Anyone got a problem with that can settle up and ride out tonight. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Boone picked up Selena's trunk like it weighed nothing and headed toward the house. Come on. Selena followed, feeling every pair of eyes on her back like brands.
Inside, the main house was warmer but just as rough. Wood floors scarred by boot heels, walls bare except for a few shelves and hooks, furniture that looked handmade and purely functional. The kitchen took up half the space. A massive iron stove, a long workbench, shelves stocked with basics but nothing fresh, no organization. It's yours, Boone said, setting her trunk down by the door. Cook 3 meals a day, feed whoever's here. Supplies are in the storeroom out back. You need something, tell me. How many men? 15 usually, sometimes more if we've got roundup or building to do. Selena's mind raced, calculating. 15 men, 3 meals. She'd never cooked for more than 5 people at once. What if... She stopped herself. What if what? What if they don't like my cooking? Boone looked at her like she'd asked if the sky was blue. Then they'll eat it anyway, because it's that, or starve. He crossed to the door, paused with his hand on the frame. You'll do fine, Miss Harrow. Don't let them tell you different. Then he was gone, and Selena was alone in a kitchen 3 times the size of her cabin, surrounded by supplies she didn't know, and men who didn't want her there. She stood in the center of the room, breathing hard, and made herself a promise. I'm not breaking. The next morning arrived too fast. Selena woke before dawn, her body aching from sleeping on a straw mattress in the small side room Boone had pointed her to. The house was freezing, silent except for the wind. She dressed quickly, layering every piece of clothing she owned, and stumbled into the kitchen. The stove was cold, dead ash in the belly. She'd forgotten to bank it the night before. Stupid, she muttered, kneeling down and starting from scratch. Kindling, paper, a match that took 3 tries to light because her hands were shaking. The fire caught slowly, grudgingly, and she fed it piece by piece until the stove started to warm. Breakfast. She had to make breakfast. For 15 men, in an hour. Her mind went blank with panic. Then her mother's voice, sharp and clear. Stop wasting time feeling sorry for yourself and put your hands to work. Selena took a breath and started moving. Flour, salt, eggs from the cold box, milk that had frozen overnight and needed thawing over the stove. She mixed biscuit dough with numb fingers, rolled it out on the bench, cut rough circles and laid them on greased pans. Into the oven. Then bacon, thick slabs that she sliced and threw into the largest skillet she could find. The smell filled the kitchen, rich and promising. Coffee. She almost forgot the coffee. By the time the men started filing in, boots stomping snow off on the porch, Selena had plates ready, biscuits, bacon, fried eggs, a pot of gravy that was thicker than she'd meant but edible. They came in like wolves, wary, hungry, sizing her up. She set the food on the long table without meeting anyone's eyes and stepped back to the stove. The first man to sit down was the wiry one from yesterday, Carter. He looked at his plate like it might bite him, then picked up a biscuit and took a careful bite. Chewed, swallowed, reached for another. The tension in the room shifted. Not gone, but loosened. One by one, the men started eating. No compliments, no conversation. Just the sound of forks scraping plates and coffee being poured. Selena gripped the edge of the stove and tried not to cry from relief. Boone was the last to come in. He took a seat at the head of the table, served himself without ceremony, and ate in the same steady, mechanical way he'd eaten her stew that first night. When he finished, he stood, picked up his plate, and carried it to the wash basin. Every man in the room stopped eating. Boone rinsed his plate, set it on the drying rack, and walked out. After a long moment, Carter stood, picked up his plate, rinsed it. Then another man. Then another. By the time the kitchen emptied, every plate was washed and stacked, and Selena was standing by the stove with her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. They didn't hate it. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Chats. The days blurred together after that. Up before dawn, light the stove, make breakfast, clean, make lunch, clean, make dinner, clean.
Fallen to bed so exhausted she couldn't remember her own name. The work was brutal, harder than anything she'd done in Black Hollow. 50 pounds of potatoes to peel, bread dough that fought her every need, a stove that burned too hot or not hot enough depending on the wind. Men who ate like they were starving and expected more. But slowly, so slowly she almost didn't notice, things started to change. The men stopped watching her like she might disappear, started nodding when they came in for meals. A few even muttered thank you on their way out. She learned their names. Carter, the wiry one with the limp. Hank, a massive bear of a man who never spoke but always cleaned his plate twice. Young Jesse, the stable boy who couldn't be more than 16 and looked half-starved most days. And she learned their secrets. Carter couldn't stomach peppers. They tore up his gut, left him pale and sweating. Selena stopped using them in his portions. Hank had a sweet tooth he tried to hide. She started making extra dessert and leaving it on the counter where he could take it without asking. Jesse was always hungry. Always. Like his body was still growing and couldn't keep up. Selena began setting aside biscuits and wrapping them in cloth, leaving them by the door where he'd find them on his way to the stables before dawn. She didn't announce it, didn't make a show, just did it. And the men noticed. One night, 3 weeks in, Carter stayed behind after dinner. He stood by the wash basin, turning his hat in his hands. "Miss Harrow." Selena looked up from wiping down the stove. "Yes?" "That stew tonight, the one without the peppers." He cleared his throat. "I appreciate it." "You're welcome." He nodded, put his hat back on, and left. It was the first real conversation she'd had with any of them. That same week, Hank appeared in the kitchen doorway one morning before breakfast, holding a skinned rabbit. "Thought you might use this," he said, not quite looking at her. "Thank you, Hank." He grunted and disappeared. The rabbit made a stew that lasted 2 days. And Jesse, quiet, gangly Jesse, stopped stealing biscuits at midnight because Selena started leaving them out for him on purpose, wrapped and waiting on the counter with a note that just said, J. The ranch didn't feel like enemy territory anymore. It felt like something else. Something she didn't have a name for yet. But there was one person she couldn't figure out. Boone. He ate every meal in the same seat, at the same time, with the same silence. Never praised the food, never complained, never said more than a handful of words to her in a day. But every night, after the men cleared out, he stayed behind. Washed dishes beside her without being asked, carried the heavy pots she couldn't lift, chopped firewood and stacked it by the stove so she wouldn't run out. And sometimes when she was elbow deep in dishwater and too tired to stand straight, she'd catch him watching her with an expression she couldn't read. Not pity, not judgment, something else. One night, as she was drying the last pan, she finally asked, "Why do you do this?" Boone paused, a dripping plate in his hands. "Do what?" "Help. Every night. You don't have to." "Neither do you. It's my job. It's my ranch, duh." Selena set the pan down and turned to face him. "That's not an answer." Boone looked at her for a long moment, water dripping from the plate onto the floor. Then he set it in the drying rack and picked up the towel. "You remind me of someone," he said quietly. "Who?" "My mother." He dried his hands slowly, deliberately. "She ran a house like this when I was a kid. Fed ranch hands, travelers, anyone who showed up hungry. Worked herself half to death doing it." "What happened to her?" "Fever took her when I was 12. The words were flat, but Selena heard the weight underneath them. The kind of grief that never really healed, just scarred over. "I'm sorry," she said. "Don't be. She taught me something important." "What?" Boone hung the towel on its hook and met her eyes. "That the people who feed you are the ones who keep you alive, and you don't let them do it alone." Something in Selena's chest cracked open. Not breaking, blooming. "Thank you," she whispered. Boone nodded once, then headed for the door. Stopped with his hand on the frame, just like that first night. "You're doing good here, Miss Harrow. Don't let anyone tell you different." Then he was gone, and Selena was alone in the warm kitchen, crying for the first time since her mother died. Spring came slowly to the mountains. The snow melted in patches, revealing brown grass and mud that swallowed boots to the ankle. The cattle grew restless.
The men worked longer hours, mending fences and preparing for the calving season. And Selena's kitchen became the heart of the ranch. She still cooked 3 meals a day, still worked until her hands were raw and her back screamed. But now the men lingered after eating, talked, laughed, told stories about cattle that outsmarted them and horses that threw them and winters that nearly killed them. She learned that Carter had been a soldier once, that Hank could play the harmonica, but only when he thought nobody was listening, that Jesse's parents had died in a fire, and the only family he had left was this rough collection of cowboys who'd taken him in without question. The ranch felt less like a workplace and more like home. But Selena knew better than to get comfortable, because in the frozen north, winter always came back. And when it did, it came with teeth. The first sign of trouble came on a Tuesday morning in late March when Selena found a dead crow frozen to the porch railing. Not unusual by itself. Birds died all the time in the mountains. But this one was stiff as iron, its beak open like it had been screaming, and when she tried to pry it loose, the whole thing crumbled into black feathers and ice. Carter saw her staring at it and spat into the snow. Bad omen, that. It's just a bird, Selena said, but her voice didn't sound convinced. Yeah. Carter limped past her toward the stables. Just a bird. By noon, the temperature had dropped 15 degrees. By sunset, the wind was howling again, meaner than it had been all winter, and the sky had turned the color of old bruises. Boone came into the kitchen while Selena was pulling bread from the oven, his face tight with something she'd learned to recognize as worry. Storm's coming, he said. Big one. We're bringing the cattle down from the upper pastures tonight. Tonight? In the dark? Can't wait. If we leave them up there and this thing hits like I think it will, we'll lose half the herd. He grabbed his coat from the hook. Don't wait dinner on us. Could be midnight before we're back. I'll keep it warm. He paused at the door, looked back at her. Keep the fires going, all of them, and stay inside. Then he was gone, and Selena was alone with the rising wind and a feeling in her gut that told her Carter was right about the omen. The men came back in waves throughout the night, stamping snow and cursing the cold. Selena kept the stew hot and the coffee strong, refilling bowls and cups without comment as they thawed their frozen hands over the stove. It's bad out there, Hank said, his voice rougher than usual. Worse than last year. How many did we get down? Carter asked. Most of them, maybe 100 still up on the ridge, but Boone says we can't risk it. Wind's too strong. Jesse came in last, his face pale and his hands shaking so hard he could barely hold his spoon. Selena wrapped a blanket around his shoulders and pushed a bowl into his hands. Eat, she said. All of it. He obeyed without argument, which told her exactly how scared he was. Boone didn't come back until after midnight. When he finally walked through the door, his coat was crusted with ice, and his face looked like it had aged 10 years in 6 hours. Selena had saved him a full plate, kept it covered by the stove. She set it in front of him without a word and poured coffee so hot it steamed in the cold air. He ate mechanically, like fuel going into an engine. When he finished, he just sat there, staring at nothing. How bad? Selena asked quietly. Bad enough. His voice was hollow. We'll know more in the morning. But morning brought worse news. The storm hit just before dawn with a violence that made the previous months look like gentle weather. Wind screamed through the valley like something wounded and furious, driving snow so thick you couldn't see 10 feet. The ranch buildings groaned under the assault. Somewhere outside, something crashed, wood splintering, metal tearing. Selena had never heard anything like it. The men gathered in the main house because the bunkhouses weren't safe, crowding into the front room while the walls shook and the windows rattled in their frames. Nobody spoke. They just listened to the storm trying to kill them and hoped the roof held. Horses are panicking, Jesse said, his voice barely audible over the wind. I can hear them from here. Leave them, Boone said flatly. You go out there, you're dead. But I said leave them. The boy's face crumpled, but he stayed put. Selena kept the stove burning and made pot after pot of coffee, because it was the only useful thing she could do while the world tried to tear itself apart outside. Her hands were steady, even though her heart was racing. Fear was useless. Action was what mattered. The storm raged for 18 hours straight. When it finally broke, the silence was almost worse than the noise. The men emerged from the house like survivors of a shipwreck, blinking in the weak afternoon light, and surveyed the damage. Two barns had partially collapsed. The cattle that had made it down from the upper pastures were scattered across the valley, half buried in snowdrifts. Fences were destroyed. And in the main corral, 3 horses lay dead, frozen in positions that suggested they'd panicked and broken their own legs trying to escape. Jesse saw them and turned away, retching into the snow. "Get the shovels," Boone said, his voice like gravel. "We bury them before dark." It took 3 days to dig out from the storm. 3 days of backbreaking work, frozen fingers, and exhaustion so deep it felt like drowning. Selena cooked enough food to feed an army, and still the men came back hollow-eyed and hungry. On the 4th day, she was hauling water from the well when she heard it. A sound. Faint. Almost buried under the wind, crying. She stopped, the bucket heavy in her hands, and listened. There it was again, high-pitched, desperate. Selena set the bucket down and followed the sound around the side of the bunkhouse, her boots crunching through knee-deep snow. The crying got louder, closer. And then she saw him. A child. Maybe 7 or 8 years old, indigenous, from the look of his dark hair and the beaded design on what was left of his torn coat. He was curled in a drift against the bunkhouse wall, his skin blue-gray with cold, his lips moving soundlessly. "Oh God," Selena breathed. She didn't think, didn't hesitate. She dropped to her knees, pulled off her own coat, and wrapped it around the boy's tiny, frozen body. He was so cold he didn't even flinch. "I've got you," she said, even though he probably couldn't hear her. "I've got you." She lifted him, he weighed almost nothing, and ran back toward the main house, slipping in the snow, her lungs burning from the cold. The boy's head lolled against her shoulder. She couldn't tell if he was breathing. "Boone!" she screamed. "Boone!" The door flew open. Boone took one look at what she was carrying, and his face went white. Inside. Now. Selena stumbled through the door and went straight to the stove, laying the boy down on the floor, as close to the heat as she dared. His skin was waxy. His fingers were black at the tips. Frostbite. Maybe worse. Boone dropped to his knees beside her, already pulling off the boy's wet clothes with practiced efficiency. "Get blankets." "And warm water. Not hot. Warm." Selena's hands shook as she filled a basin and grabbed every blanket she could find. By the time she got back, Boone had stripped the boy down and was rubbing his arms and legs, trying to get blood flowing again. "He's not responding," Boone said, his voice tight. "Come on, kid. Come on." Selena wrapped the boy in blankets and pulled him against her own body, sharing her heat the way her mother had taught her when animals got too cold. The boy was small enough that she could tuck him completely against her chest, her arms wrapped around him like a cocoon. "Breathe," she whispered against his hair. "Please breathe." For a long, terrible moment, nothing happened. Then the boy gasped, a tiny, rattling sound, but a breath. "That's it," Boone said. "Again, come on." Another breath, stronger this time. The boy's eyes fluttered open, dark brown, unfocused, terrified. He tried to pull away from Selena, but his body wouldn't obey. He just trembled against her and made a sound like a wounded animal. "You're safe," Selena said softly. "I promise, you're safe." She didn't know if he understood English, didn't know if he understood anything in that moment except fear and cold and pain, but she held him anyway, rocking slightly, and eventually the trembling eased and his breathing steadied. The men had gathered in the doorway, watching in silence. "Where'd he come from?" Carter asked. "Probably the reservation," Boone said, still rubbing the boy's feet. 20 miles east. Must have gotten separated from his family during the storm." "Think they're alive?" Boone didn't answer. He didn't have to. Selena looked down at the child in her arms, this small broken thing that should have died, and felt something fierce and protective rise in her chest. "He's staying here," she said. Not a question. Boone met her eyes. "Yeah, he is." The boy, they later learned, was named Takota, friend to everyone in his language. Though it took 3 weeks before he spoke enough to tell them, recovered slowly. The frostbite on his fingers wasn't as bad as they'd feared. He'd keep all of them, though 2 would never bend quite right again. But the fear took longer to heal. For the first week, he barely spoke. Just watched them all with wide, wary eyes, like he expected them to hurt him at any moment. He wouldn't eat unless Selena sat beside him, wouldn't sleep unless she was in the room. She didn't mind. Something about the boy's presence filled a hollow place inside her she hadn't known existed. Boone watched them together one evening, Selena teaching Dakota how to knead bread dough, the boy's small hands mimicking her movements with intense concentration, and something shifted in his expression, softened. "You're good with him," Boone said quietly. "He's a good kid." "That's not what I meant." Selena looked up. Boone was standing in the doorway with his arms crossed, but his face wasn't hard like usual. It was open, vulnerable. "What did you mean?" she asked. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I mean, you're the kind of person who runs into a blizzard to save someone. Most people wouldn't. Most people would have walked past." "I heard him crying." "Yeah. And you did something about it." He pushed off the door frame. "That matters, Selena." It was the first time he'd used her first name. She felt her face flush and looked back down at the bread dough, her heart doing something complicated in her chest. Dakota looked between them with the knowing expression of a child who understood more than adults gave him credit for. He didn't say anything, just smiled into his dough. The ranch settled into a new rhythm after that. Dakota became part of the household, helping Selena in the kitchen and following Jesse around the stables like a shadow. The men treated him with the same rough gentleness they showed the horses, firm but kind, expecting work but patient with mistakes. And Selena felt something she hadn't felt in years. Happy. Not the tentative, fragile happiness of someone waiting for the other shoe to drop. Real happiness. The kind that came from waking up every morning and knowing you were exactly where you were supposed to be. But she should have known better than to trust it. Because 2 weeks after Dakota arrived, the real disaster struck. It started with Hank. He came to breakfast looking pale and sweaty, his massive frame somehow diminished. He sat down at his usual spot, stared at his plate, and didn't touch it. "You sick?" Carter asked. "Just tired." But by lunch, he was worse, shaking, feverish, unable to keep down water. By dinner, 3 more men were showing the same symptoms. "Food poisoning," Carter said, watching another ranch hand stumble outside to vomit in the snow. "Must be something we ate." But Selena had made the same food for everyone, and she felt fine. Dakota felt fine. Boone felt fine. "It's not the food," she said. Then what? By the next morning, 8 men were down. Fever, chills, vomiting, weakness so profound they couldn't stand. The ranch ground to a halt. Work stopped. The healthy men were too busy trying to care for the sick ones to do anything else. Boone sent Jesse to town for the doctor. The boy rode back alone 6 hours later, his face grim. "He won't come," Jesse said. "Says it sounds like cholera. Says if we brought it up here, we probably all have it, and he's not risking his own life to treat men who are already dead." "We're not dead," Carter snapped, then bent over and retched into a bucket. Selena's mind raced. Cholera. She'd heard stories. Whole towns wiped out, families dead within days. The kind of sickness that didn't care how strong you were or how hard you fought. "It came from the supplies," Boone said, his voice flat. "That last shipment from town. Must have been contaminated water or something spoiled." "What do we do?" Jesse asked, his voice breaking. Boone looked at Selena. She saw the question in his eyes before he asked it. "I don't know how to fight this," she said honestly. "I don't know medicine." "But you'll try." It wasn't a question. Selena looked around at the men who'd become her family. Hank, who left her wildflowers. Carter, who'd been the first to say thank you. Jesse, who taught Dakota how to curry a horse. All of them sick. All of them scared. "Yeah," she said. "I'll try." She didn't sleep for the next 3 days. She boiled water until the stove ran dry, made broth from every scrap of meat and bone she could find, forced liquid down throats even when the men fought her. She mixed remedies from her mother's old cookbook. Willow bark for fever, mint for nausea, anything she could think of that might help. Mostly, she just sat with them. Held their hands when the fever got bad, cleaned up vomit and waste without complaint, whispered that they were going to live even when she wasn't sure she believed it. Boone worked beside her the whole time, doing the heavy lifting, carrying men who'd collapsed, hauling buckets, chopping firewood to keep the fires burning. He looked like hell. Dark circles under his eyes, 3 days of stubble, hands raw from work. On the 4th night, after they'd gotten the last of the sick men settled, Selena finally collapsed. Not dramatically,
just sat down on the floor by the stove and couldn't make herself get back up.
Boone found her there 20 minutes later, staring at nothing. "You need to sleep," he said. "Can't. Have to check on—" "I'll check on them. You sleep." "Boone, that's not a request, Selena." But she couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Hank's gray face, Carter's shaking hands, the way Jessie had looked at her like she could fix this when she had no idea what she was doing. "We're going to lose them," she whispered. Boone sat down beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "Maybe. That's supposed to make me feel better?" "No. But lying to you won't help either." He stared at the fire. "I've lost men before. Good men. To weather, accidents, stupidity. It's part of running a ranch this far out. You do everything you can, and sometimes it's not enough. I can't accept that. You might have to." Selena turned to look at him. Really look at him. At the exhaustion carved into his face, the weight he carried, the way he still showed up every single day, even when everything was falling apart. "How do you do it?" she asked. "How do you keep going when you know you might fail?" Boone was quiet for a long time. Then, "You find something worth fighting for, and you don't let go." His hand found hers in the space between them. Rough, scarred, warm. She didn't pull away. They sat like that until the fire burned low and the house grew cold, and neither of them said another word. By the 6th day, the worst had passed. Hank woke up asking for food. Carter stopped vomiting. One by one, the sick men began to recover, weak and shaky, but alive. Not all of them. They lost 2. A young ranch hand named Tom, who'd only been there 3 months, and an older cowboy called Dutch, who'd worked for Boone for 15 years. They buried them on the ridge overlooking the valley, in ground still half frozen. Selena stood at the graveside and tried not to think about how close they'd come to burying all of them. After everyone else had gone, Boone stayed behind. He stood there staring at the mounds of dirt and stone, his hat in his hands. "You saved most of them," he said finally. "That counts." "Does it?" "Yeah, it does." Selena wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I didn't know what I was doing." "Neither did I, but you did it anyway." He looked at her. "The ranch would have died without you, Selena. Every man here knows it. They would have figured something out." "No, they wouldn't have." He put his hat back on. "You're tougher than you think. Tougher than most of them." The words settled into her chest like stones. Not heavy. Anchoring. When they walked back down to the ranch house, Dakota was waiting on the porch with Jessie. The boy ran to Selena and wrapped his arms around her waist, holding on like she might disappear. "We thought you weren't coming back," he said, his voice muffled against her coat. "I'm here," Selena said, smoothing his hair. "I'm not going anywhere." Over Dakota's head, she caught Boone watching them with that expression again, the one she still couldn't quite read, but it was getting clearer. The recovery was slow. The men who'd been sick needed weeks to regain their strength. The ranch work fell behind, spring planting got delayed, fences that should have been mended stayed broken. But nobody complained. They were alive. That was enough. Selena threw herself back into cooking with renewed focus, determined to rebuild their strength with food that would stick to their ribs. She made stews rich with meat and fat, bread so dense it could double as a weapon, pie sweetened with the last of the molasses. And every night, Boone stayed behind to help clean up. It had become routine now, expected. But lately, the silences between them felt different, charged with something neither of them knew how to name. One evening, after everyone else had gone to bed and the kitchen was finally clean, Boone didn't leave. He just stood by the door, his hand on the frame, staring at nothing. "You all right?" Selena asked. "When you ran into that blizzard to get the boy," he said slowly, "I thought you were insane." "I probably was." "Yeah." He turned to face her. "But you did it anyway, and when the sickness came and the doctor wouldn't help, you didn't run. You stayed." "Where would I go?" "Anywhere. Back to town. Somewhere safer." Selena shook her head. "This is home now. You don't abandon home when things get hard. Most people do." "Then most people are cowards." Boone crossed the room in 3 strides and stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "You're not like anyone I've ever met," he said quietly. Her heart was hammering. "Is that good or bad?" "Good. Terrifying, both." He lifted his hand like he wanted to touch her face, then stopped himself. His jaw clenched. "I should go," he said. "Yeah, you should." Neither of them moved. The moment stretched between them, taut and trembling. Selena could feel the heat radiating off his body, could see the pulse beating in his throat. One step forward, and she could... Dakota's voice cut through the tension like a knife. "Selena, I had a bad dream." They jumped apart like they'd been burned. Selena turned to see the boy standing in the doorway to her room, rubbing his eyes. "Come here, sweetheart." She scooped him up and carried him back to bed, tucking him in with the blanket he'd claimed as his own. By the time she came back out, Boone was gone. But his coat was still hanging by the door. She brought it to him the next morning, found him in the barn checking on the horses. "You forgot this," she said. "Thanks." Their fingers brushed when he took it. Neither of them mentioned the night before. But something had shifted. Everyone could feel it. Carter started giving them knowing looks during meals. Hank smiled into his coffee. Even Jesse, oblivious as he usually was, seemed to notice the way Boone's eyes followed Selena around the kitchen. "You gonna ask her or just keep staring?" Carter said one afternoon when he thought Selena was out of earshot. She wasn't. "Ask her what?" Boone's voice was carefully neutral. "Don't play stupid, you know what." "Leave it alone, Carter. Someone's got to say it. You've been moon-eyed over that woman since the sickness. Either do something about it or stop torturing yourself." "I said leave it." There was enough warning in Boone's tone that Carter shut up. But the words hung in the air like smoke. That night, Selena lay awake in her room, staring at the ceiling and trying to make sense of everything that had happened in the past 3 months. She'd come here expecting to cook and be ignored. Instead, she'd found a family, a home, and something else. Something she didn't have a name for but felt every time Boone looked at her. She was so lost in thought that she didn't hear the commotion outside at first. When she did, it was already too late. Shouting. Horses. The sound of wheels on frozen ground. Selena threw on her coat and ran outside to find the entire ranch gathered in the yard, staring at an elegant black carriage that looked completely out of place in the rough mountain setting. And stepping down from it, dressed in a traveling suit that probably cost more than Selena made in a year, was the most beautiful woman she'd ever seen. Tall, slender, perfect golden hair swept up in an elaborate style. Skin like porcelain, the kind of woman who made other women feel inadequate just by existing. She looked around at the ranch with barely concealed disdain, then her eyes landed on Boone. "Hello, darling," she said, her voice smooth as honey. "Did you miss me?" Boone had gone completely still. "Vivian." The woman, Vivian, smiled. "Surprised? I told you I'd come visit eventually. I didn't think you meant it." "Well, here I am." She glided forward, and Selena realized with a sick feeling that she was heading straight for Boone. "Aren't you going to welcome me properly?" Before he could answer, Vivian's eyes found Selena standing on the porch, and her smile turned sharp. "And who," she said slowly, "is this?" Selena felt every eye in the yard turn to her. The weight of their attention pressed down like a physical thing, making her acutely aware of her flour-stained apron, her work-roughened hands, the way her hair had come loose from its braid during the morning's cooking. Next to Vivian's polished perfection, she felt like something dragged in from the barn. "That's Selena Harrow," Boone said, his voice carefully flat. "The cook." The cook. 2 words that shouldn't have stung but did anyway. Vivian's eyes traveled down Selena's body with the kind of assessment women reserve for things they wanted to dismiss. How domestic. "Miss Harrow," Boone continued, and Selena noticed he'd switched back to her last name. "This is Vivian Mercer, from San Francisco." "Denver, actually," Vivian corrected, still looking at Selena like she was a particularly uninteresting piece of furniture. "Though I spend most of my time in the city now, Boone and I were close, before he buried himself up here in the wilderness." The pause before close was deliberate, pointed. Selena felt something cold settle in her stomach. "Ma'am." "Oh, don't ma'am me. It makes me feel ancient." Vivian finally turned her attention back to Boone, her smile widening. "Darling, you didn't tell me you'd hired help. Though I suppose someone has to cook for all these..." She gestured vaguely at the assembled ranch hands. "Men." Carter's face went hard. Hank crossed his arms. Even Jesse looked offended. "What are you doing here, Vivian?" Boone asked. "Can't a woman visit an old friend? You said you'd never set foot on a ranch again. Called it barbaric, if I remember right." "People change." Vivian's eyes glittered. "Besides, I was curious. Wanted to see if you were still alive out here, or if you'd finally come to your senses and sold this place." "I'm not selling." "Of course not. Stubborn as ever." She moved closer to him, laying a gloved hand on his arm. "But surely you can spare a few days to show me around. For old times' sake?" Boone looked like he had rather chew glass, but years of ingrained politeness won out. "You can stay in the main house. I'll take the bunkhouse." "How gallant!" Vivian's voice dripped with amusement. "Though I do hope your cook knows how to prepare something more refined than—" She sniffed delicately. "Whatever that smell is." "Bacon," Selena said, her voice tight. "From breakfast." How quaint. The word landed like the slap. Selena felt her face flush, but before she could respond, Dakota appeared at her side, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Who's she?" he asked, staring up at Vivian with open suspicion. Vivian's perfect nose wrinkled. "And there's a child. How very frontier." "His name is Dakota," Selena said, pulling the boy closer. "He lives here." "Does he?" It wasn't a question. Vivian's gaze swept over Dakota with the same dismissive assessment she'd given Selena. "How charitable of you all." Something in Boone's expression shifted, hardened. "Dakota's family, same as everyone else here." "Family?" Vivian laughed, a sound like wind chimes that somehow made it worse. "Boone, darling, these are employees. There's a difference. Not on my ranch." The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. The ranch hands stood frozen, waiting to see what would happen next. Selena could feel the tension radiating off them in waves, loyalty to Boone warring with years of conditioning that said, "You didn't talk back to women like Vivian Mercer." Finally, Vivian sighed. "Well, someone show me where I'm sleeping. The journey was exhausting, and I desperately need to wash off the road dust." Boone jerked his head at Jesse. "Help Miss Mercer with her bags." The boy moved forward reluctantly, grabbing the leather trunk from the back of the carriage like it personally offended him. Vivian swept past them all toward the main house, her skirts rustling against the packed snow. At the door, she paused and looked back at Selena. "I do hope you'll prepare something special for dinner tonight. I'm simply famished." Then she disappeared inside, leaving a wake of expensive perfume and unspoken expectations. The moment she was gone, the yard erupted in muttered curses. "Who the hell does she think she is?" Carter spat. "Boone's mistake, apparently," Hank rumbled. "I don't like her," Dakota announced, still clinging to Selena. "She's mean." "That's enough," Boone said, but there wasn't much force behind it. He looked exhausted. "Get back to work. All of you." The men dispersed slowly, casting dark looks at the main house. Selena started to follow them, but Boone caught her arm. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I didn't know she was coming." "You don't owe me an apology." "Yeah, I do." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd learned meant he was frustrated. "Vivian and it was a long time ago. Before I bought this place. We were supposed to get married." The words hit Selena harder than they should have. "What happened?" "She wanted me to move to Denver, work for her father's company, live in a house with servants, and go to parties, and be someone I'm not." He looked out at the mountains, his jaw tight. "I wanted this. So she left. And now she's back." "Yeah. Why?" "Hell if I know." Boone met her eyes. "But whatever she wants, it's not to reconnect with an old friend. Vivian doesn't do anything without a reason." Selena wanted to ask what that reason might be, but Dakota was pulling at her hand, and the breakfast dishes still needed washing, and Vivian Mercer was inside the house that had started to feel like home, claiming space that wasn't hers. "I should get back to work," Selena said. Boone's hand was still on her arm. He looked like he wanted to say something else, but couldn't find the words. Finally, he just nodded and let her go. Inside, Vivian had already made herself comfortable in Boone's room, the largest in the house, with the good bed and the window that overlooked the valley. Her trunk sat open on the floor, spilling expensive dresses and silk undergarments across the rough wooden boards. Selena stood in the doorway, watching Vivian examine the room with barely concealed distaste. "This is where he sleeps?" Vivian asked, touching the plain quilt on the bed like it might contaminate her. "How very rustic."
"It's clean." "I'm sure it is." Vivian turned and her smile was sharp. "Tell me, Miss Harrow, how long have you been cooking here?" 3 months. "And before that?" "I lived in Black Hollow." "Doing what?" The question felt like a trap, but Selena answered anyway. "Surviving." Vivian's eyebrows rose. "How honest. I appreciate that." She moved closer, studying Selena the way someone might study a bug under glass. "You care for him, don't you, Boone?"
Selena's heart lurched. "I work for him." "That's not what I asked." "It's the only answer you're getting." For the first time, something like genuine interest flickered in Vivian's eyes. "You have a spine. That's unexpected." "Why? Because I'm fat?" The word hung in the air between them. Selena watched Vivian's face, waiting for the flinch, the poorly concealed disgust, the dismissal. Instead, Vivian laughed. "Because you're a cook on a cattle ranch. Most women in your position would be terrified of me." "Should I be?" "Probably." Vivian sat on the edge of the bed, her posture perfect even in this rough setting. "But I don't think you scare easily, running into blizzards to save children, nursing sick men back from the brink. Boone told me about you in his letters." Selena blinked. "He wrote to you?" "Occasionally, brief updates. Very him, lots of facts, no feelings." Vivian's smile turned sad. "But I could read between the lines. He's different now. Because of you." "I don't... Please don't insult both of us by pretending you don't know what I'm talking about." Vivian stood, smoothing her skirts. "I came here because I wanted to see if it was true. If Boone Callahan, the man who couldn't love anyone but himself in this godforsaken ranch, had finally found something, someone, worth changing for." Selena felt like the floor had dropped out from under her. "You're wrong." "Am I?" Vivian moved to the window, looking out at the yard where Boone was helping repair a fence. "Watch him. He looks at this place like it owns him. But when he looks at you..." She trailed off. "Well, let's just say I recognize that look. He used to look at me that way once." "Then why did you leave?" "Because I didn't want to be buried alive on a ranch in the middle of nowhere." Vivian's voice was matter-of-fact. "I wanted parties and society and a life that mattered beyond cattle and snow. And I thought eventually he'd realize that too, that he'd give this up and come find me. But he didn't. No, he didn't." Vivian turned back to face her. "So I came here to see what was worth more than I was. And now I know." The silence stretched between them, heavy with things neither of them wanted to say out loud. "I'm making pot roast for dinner," Selena said finally. "It'll be ready at 6. "How domestic," Vivian said again, but this time it didn't sound like an insult, just an observation. Selena fled to the kitchen and threw herself into cooking with enough force to crack cutting boards. She peeled potatoes like they'd personally wronged her, chopped carrots with violent precision, seasoned the roast so aggressively that Dakota watched her with wide eyes. "Are you mad?" he asked. "No. You look mad." "I'm not mad. Selena stopped herself. "I'm busy. Go help Jesse with the horses." "But go." The boy left, and Selena braced her hands on the workbench, trying to breathe through the tightness in her chest. She had no right to feel this way. Boone wasn't hers. This life wasn't hers. She was just the cook, exactly like he'd said. The cook. The words kept echoing in her head, mocking her for thinking she could ever be anything more. Dinner that night was torture. Vivian sat at the head of the table in one of her expensive dresses, deep blue silk that made her eyes look like sapphires, holding court like she owned the place. She asked the ranch hands questions with honeyed politeness that barely masked her contempt, complimented the food in a way that made it sound like an insult, and monopolized Boone's attention with stories about mutual acquaintances and Denver society. The men ate in hostile silence, their usual camaraderie strangled by Vivian's presence. Even Carter, who always had something to say, kept his mouth shut and his eyes on his plate. Selena served and cleared and tried to be invisible, which should have been easy. She'd spent most of her life being invisible. But tonight it felt different. Worse.
Because Boone barely looked at her.
He answered Vivian's questions and listened to her stories and played the host with grim determination, but he didn't stay after to wash dishes. Didn't that had become their private language over the past months. It was like she'd disappeared. After everyone left, Selena cleaned the kitchen alone. Her hands shook as she scrubbed plates, and she told herself it was just exhaustion, just the long day catching up to her. But when she heard Vivian's laughter drifting from the front room, followed by Boone's low rumble of a response, something inside her cracked. She dried her hands on her apron and walked to her room without looking back. The next 3 days followed the same brutal pattern. Vivian charmed and needled and claimed space with the casual entitlement of someone who'd never been told no. She convinced Boone to take her riding through the valley, to show her the upper pastures where they'd lost cattle in the storm, to give her a tour of the ranch operations like she actually cared. And everywhere they went, Selena watched from windows and doorways, hating herself for caring, but unable to stop. The men noticed. Of course they noticed. "You gonna let her get away with this?" Carter asked one morning, finding Selena kneading bread with enough force to punch through the workbench. Get away with what?" "Don't play dumb. That woman's circling Boone like a vulture, and you're just standing here making bread." "What am I supposed to do, Carter? She's beautiful and rich and everything I'm not. She's also mean as a snake and twice as fake." Carter leaned against the counter. "You know what Boone needs? Someone real. Someone who doesn't run when things get hard. Someone who'd risk their own neck to save a dying kid in a blizzard." "That doesn't mean—" "It means exactly what you think it means. But you gotta speak up, girl. Men like Boone are thick as fence posts when it comes to this kind of thing. You want him to know how you feel, you gotta tell him." "I can't." "Why not?" "Because saying it out loud would make it real, and if he rejected her, it would break something inside her that she didn't know how to fix. Because Vivian was everything Selena wasn't, and some competitions were lost before they even started. Because hoping hurt more than resignation ever could. Because it won't change anything," Selena said instead. Carter shook his head. "You're wrong, but I guess you'll figure that out on your own." That night, Vivian cornered Selena in the kitchen after dinner. "We need to talk," she said, closing the door behind her. Selena kept washing dishes. "About what?" "About the fact that you're in love with him and too scared to do anything about it." The plate in Selena's hand slipped, clattering into the wash basin. "I'm not. Please. I can see it every time you look at him. Every time he walks into a room and your whole face changes." Vivian moved closer. "And here's the thing. He loves you too." Selena's heart stopped. "No." "Yes, but he's too stubborn and you're too afraid, so you're both just circling each other like idiots while I sit here and watch." "Then why are you here?" Selena spun to face her. "If you know all this, if you can see it so clearly, why did you come?" "Because I needed to be sure." Vivian's voice was soft now, almost kind. "I needed to see if what I gave up was worth giving up. If Boone had found something real, or if he was still just married to this ranch and nothing else." And he found something real. Vivian smiled, but it was sad. "He found you. And you're exactly the kind of woman who deserves someone like him. Stubborn, loyal, brave enough to run into storms when anyone with sense would run away." "I'm not brave." "Liar." Vivian reached out and touched Selena's hand. "I'm leaving tomorrow. And when I do, you're going to stop hiding in this kitchen and tell him how you feel. Because if you don't, you'll regret it for the rest of your life. Trust me on that." She left Selena standing there, shaking and confused and terrified. But before dawn the next morning, everything changed. Selena woke to shouting. She threw on her coat and ran outside to find the yard in chaos. Men running toward the east pasture, Boone already mounted and riding hard, Jesse sprinting to keep up. "What's happening?" Selena grabbed Carter's arm as he rushed past. "Fire!" he gasped. "The Anderson place. Wind's pushing it this way." Horror flooded through her. The Anderson Ranch was 5 miles east, but with the right wind, a prairie fire could cover that distance in hours, and everything in its path would burn. "What do we do?" "Pray it turns, or we start digging fire breaks and hope like hell we can stop it before it gets here." Carter pulled free and kept running. Selena stood in the yard as the eastern sky began to glow orange and realized with crystal clarity that everything she'd come to love was about to be tested by fire. Vivian appeared on the porch, wrapped in a silk robe that was completely inappropriate for the situation. "What's all the noise about?"
"Fire," Selena said numbly. "Coming this way." For the first time since she'd arrived, Vivian's perfect composure cracked. "How close?" "Close enough." They stared at each other across the yard, the society woman and the cook, about as different as two people could be, and something unspoken passed between them. "What can I do?" Vivian asked. Selena blinked. "What?" "To help. What can I do?" And despite everything, the jealousy, the fear, the 3 days of torture, Selena told her. They spent the next hour hauling buckets, soaking blankets, moving supplies away from the barns. Vivian's expensive dress got ruined within minutes, but she didn't complain, just worked alongside Selena with grim determination, her perfect hair coming loose and her hands getting blistered. The men returned in waves to grab supplies and relay information. The fire was moving fast. The wind was getting worse. They'd need every able-bodied digging fire breaks if they wanted any chance of saving the ranch. "You should go," Boone told Vivian when he came back for more shovels. "Take the carriage and head to town. Get ahead of this." "And leave you here to burn?" Vivian shook her head. "I may be many things, but I'm not a coward." Something flickered in Boone's eyes. Respect, maybe. Or just surprise. Then his gaze found Selena, and the look he gave her made her chest ache. "Keep the fires out and the house wet. If it gets too close, I want you and Dakota in the wagon heading south. Don't argue." "I won't leave. Selena." He grabbed her shoulders, his grip tight. "If this goes wrong, I need to know you're safe. Please." The word please from Boone Callahan's mouth was so rare it stopped her protests cold. "Okay," she whispered. He held her gaze for one more second, then mounted his horse and rode back toward the fire. By midday, the smoke was so thick they could barely breathe. The eastern horizon was a wall of orange and black, the flames visible now even from the ranch. The men worked like demons, digging trenches and burning backfires, trying to create barriers the main fire couldn't cross. Selena and Vivian kept hauling water, kept soaking everything they could reach, kept the coffee hot and the food ready for men who would stumble back exhausted and empty. "This is insane," Vivian coughed through the smoke. "Why do people live like this?" "Because it's worth it." "Is it?" Selena looked at the ranch, the buildings that housed the men who'd become family, the kitchen where she'd found purpose, the land Boone would die protecting, and realized the answer had been obvious all along. "Yeah," she said. "It is." The fire burned for 2 days straight, 2 days of smoke and fear and men pushing themselves past the point of collapse. They lost the eastern pasture and 2 line shacks, but the fire breaks held. The main ranch survived. When it was finally over, the men came back looking like they'd fought a war, covered in soot and ash, hands blistered raw, eyes red from smoke. They collapsed wherever they could find space and didn't move for hours. Selena fed them what she could, but her hands were shaking so hard she could barely hold the ladle. She'd spent 2 days expecting the flames to crest the ridge and consume everything. 2 days thinking she might never see Boone alive again. He was the last one back, riding in after dark on a horse that looked half dead with exhaustion. He slid from the saddle and almost fell, catching himself on the fence post. Selena ran to him without thinking, catching his arm. "You're hurt." "Just tired." "You're bleeding." He looked down at his hands like he'd forgotten they existed. The blisters had burst, leaving raw, weeping flesh. "I'll live. Let me clean them." "Selena, sit down before you fall down." He obeyed, which told her exactly how exhausted he was. She brought warm water and clean cloth and tended to his hands with gentle precision, cleaning ash and blood from wounds that must have hurt like hell, even though he didn't flinch. "You saved it," she said quietly. "The ranch." "We all did." "No, you did. The men told me. You worked longer than anyone, dug more trenches, refused to quit even when Carter tried to send you back." "It's my ranch, my responsibility." Selena wrapped the last bandage and didn't let go of his hand. "Why do you do this to yourself? Work until you break? Risk everything for a piece of land?" Boone was quiet for a long time. Then, "Because for most of my life, this ranch was the only thing I had that was mine. The only thing that couldn't leave or disappoint me or tell me I wasn't enough. And now?
He looked up at her, and the rawness in his expression made her breath catch. Now I'm not so sure. The words hung between them like something fragile, something that might shatter if either of them breathed wrong. Selena's hands were still wrapped around Boone's bandaged ones, and she could feel his pulse beating against her palms, steady, strong, alive. "You should rest," she said, because she didn't know what else to say. "Yeah." But he didn't move, just sat there looking at her like he was trying to memorize her face. "Selena, Boone!" Vivian's voice cut through the moment like scissors through thread. She stood in the doorway, still wearing her ruined dress, her face smudged with ash. "Can we talk?" Boone's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Give me a minute." Vivian disappeared back inside. Selena started to pull her hands away, but Boone held on. "Don't," he said quietly. "Don't go anywhere." "I'm not going anywhere. Promise me." The intensity in his voice made her chest ache. "I promise." He squeezed her hands once, then let go and stood. His legs shook from exhaustion, but he made it to the door without falling. Selena watched him go and tried not to think about what Vivian might be saying to him in the privacy of that front room. Inside, Boone found Vivian standing by the window, staring out at the scorched eastern horizon. The firelight from the stove cast shadows across her face, making her look older than her 29 years. "You were right," she said without turning around. "About this place. About why it matters. Vivian, I watched you these past 2 days. Watched you risk your life for land and cattle and people who work for you, and I finally understood what I couldn't see 5 years ago." She turned to face him. "You don't love this ranch because it's yours. You love it because it needs you, because every fence you mend and every fire you fight proves you're worth something. That's not—" "Let me finish." Her voice was gentle now, stripped of its usual armor. "I came here thinking maybe I'd made a mistake. That maybe we could try again. That maybe you'd finally grown tired of playing frontier rancher and wanted something more." Boone's stomach sank. "Vivian, but I was wrong because you already have something more. You have her." The silence that followed was deafening. "I don't know what you're talking about," Boone said finally. Vivian laughed, but there was no cruelty in it. "Yes, you do. You look at her the way I always wanted you to look at me. Like she's the only real thing in a world full of pretend. Like losing her would break something inside you that could never be fixed. She's my cook. She's your heart, you stubborn fool. And if you can't see that, you're more of an idiot than I thought." Boone sat down heavily in one of the chairs, his exhaustion finally catching up to him. "Even if that were true, which I'm not saying it is, what makes you think she'd want someone like me? Are you serious right now?" Vivian crossed the room and stood in front of him. "That woman ran into a blizzard to save a child, nursed your entire crew through a plague, just spent 2 days fighting a fire that could have killed her, all to protect this place. And you think she did all that because she likes the scenery? She did it because she's good, because she cares about people. She did it because she cares about you, you impossible man." Vivian knelt down so they were eye level. "I'm leaving tomorrow, for real this time. And when I do, I need you to promise me something." "What?" "That you'll tell her the truth. That you'll stop hiding behind your ranch and your work and your fear that you're not good enough. Because if you don't, you'll lose the best thing that's ever happened to you." Boone looked at his bandaged hands, remembering the feel of Selena's fingers, carefully cleaning his wounds, the gentleness in her touch that made him feel like something worth caring for. "What if I'm not what she needs?" he asked quietly. "Then let her decide that, but at least give her the choice." Vivian stood and smoothed her ruined dress with as much dignity as she could muster. "I really did love you once, you know, in my own terrible way." "I know. And I'm glad you found someone who loves you better than I ever could." She left him sitting there in the dark, and for the first time in 5 years, Boone Callahan let himself imagine a future that didn't involve being alone. Outside, Selena had returned to the kitchen and thrown herself into making breakfast for the exhausted men who would wake up starving. Her hands moved on autopilot, mixing batter, slicing bread, frying eggs, while her mind replayed the way Boone had looked at her, the way he'd held her hands like they were something precious. "You're making enough food for an army," Carter observed from the doorway. Selena jumped. I didn't hear you come in. That's because you were 1,000 miles away. He limped over to the stove and poured himself coffee. Thinking about a certain rancher, maybe? I'm thinking about feeding 15 hungry men, same as always. Liar. Carter took a sip and studied her over the rim of his cup. You know what your problem is? I'm sure you're about to tell me. You think you don't deserve good things? Think you gotta earn the right to be happy by working yourself half to death and never asking for anything. Selena's hands stilled on the bread she was slicing. That's not... Yeah, it is. I've seen it since day one. The way you apologize for taking up space, the way you act like feeding us is some kind of penance instead of just your job. He set his cup down. But here's the thing. Nobody here thinks you owe them anything. We're grateful. Hell, half these boys had walked through fire for you. Literally just did, in fact. They did that for the ranch. They did it because Boone asked them to. And you know why Boone fought so hard to save this place? Because it's where you are. The words hit her like a physical blow. You don't know that. Don't I? I've worked for that man for 8 years. Never seen him care about anything but cattle and fences. Then you showed up, and suddenly he's washing dishes and chopping firewood and looking at someone like they hung the damn moon. Carter shook his head. You're blind if you can't see it. Even if you're right, which I'm not saying you are, what am I supposed to do about it? Tell him how you feel. Use your words like a grown woman instead of hiding in this kitchen. I can't. Why not? Because putting words to the feeling would make it undeniable, and if Boone didn't feel the same way, she'd have to leave. She couldn't stay here loving him while he saw her as nothing more than the woman who cooked his meals. It would destroy her by inches. Because I'm scared, she admitted. Carter's face softened. Yeah, I know, but you're brave enough for this too. He left her alone with that thought, and Selena spent the next hour trying to work up the courage Carter seemed to think she possessed. By the time the men started filing in for breakfast, Vivian had already packed her bags and called for her carriage. She appeared in the kitchen doorway dressed in a fresh traveling suit, looking like the past few days had been nothing more than a strange dream. I'm leaving, she announced. Selena wiped her hands on her apron. Safe travels. That's it? No gloating? No relief that the competition is leaving? You were never my competition. Vivian smiled. No, I suppose I wasn't. Can I give you some advice? Do I have a choice? Not really. Vivian stepped closer, lowering her voice so the men at the table wouldn't hear. Men like Boone don't know how to ask for what they want. They're too busy protecting everyone else to admit they might need protecting too. So if you want him, you're going to have to be the brave one. I don't. Yes, you do, and he wants you too, so stop wasting time and tell him. Vivian touched her arm briefly. You're stronger than you think, Selena Harrow. Don't let fear make you forget that. Then she swept out of the kitchen, collected her bags from the porch, and climbed into her carriage without looking back. The men watched her go in silence, and when the carriage disappeared down the mountain road, the collective sigh of relief was audible. Good riddance, Hank muttered. She wasn't so bad, Jessie said. I mean, she helped with the fire. She also called us all barbarians, Carter pointed out. Well, we kind of are. That got a laugh, and the tension finally broke. The men dug into breakfast with renewed energy, and the ranch started to feel like itself again. Boone didn't come in for breakfast. Selena told herself it was because he was exhausted, that he needed sleep more than food. But when lunch came and went without him appearing, she started to worry. She found him in the barn, brushing down his horse with slow, methodical strokes. He'd cleaned up since last night, washed the ash from his face, changed into fresh clothes, but the exhaustion still clung to him like a second skin. You didn't eat, she said. He didn't look up. Wasn't hungry. You need to eat something. You've been working for 2 days straight. I'll eat later. Selena crossed her arms. Boone Callahan, if you pass out from exhaustion in this barn, I'm going to be very annoyed. That got a faint smile. Can't have that. No, you can't. She moved closer, watching him work. His hands were still bandaged, but he wielded the brush with practiced ease anyway. Vivian left. I know. She said goodbye? Yeah. The silence stretched between them, heavy with things neither of them knew how to say. Selena took a breath and decided that maybe Carter was right. Maybe being brave meant speaking even when your voice shook. Did she tell you why she came?
Boone's hand stilled on the brush. She wanted to see if I'd changed my mind. About the ranch. About her. And did you? No? He set the brush down and finally looked at her. I'm not who I was 5 years ago. I don't want the same things. What do you want? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Boone stepped around the horse, closing the distance between them until they were close enough that Selena could see the flecks of gold in his gray eyes. You really want to know? He asked quietly. Her heart was hammering so hard she could barely breathe. Yes. I want to stop pretending that you're just my cook. I want to stop washing dishes beside you and pretending it's because I'm being polite, when really it's the best part of my day. I want to stop watching you with Dakota and telling myself it doesn't mean anything that you're better with him than anyone I've ever known. Selena's eyes were stinging. Boone, I'm not done. He took another step closer. I want to stop lying awake at night thinking about that moment in the kitchen when Vivian interrupted us, wondering what would have happened if she hadn't. And I want to stop being a coward about the fact that somewhere between you burning that first batch of bread and saving that boy's life, I fell completely in love with you. The words knocked the air from Selena's lungs. You? What? I love you. He said it like a confession, like something he'd been carrying for too long. I love that you fed my men when they mocked you. I love that you ran into a blizzard without thinking twice. I love that you fought a plague with nothing but stubbornness and old remedies. I love that you took Vivian's cruelty and turned it into kindness. I love every damn thing about you, and I'm tired of pretending I don't. Selena couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, could only stare at this man who'd become her whole world without her quite realizing it. Say something, Boone said, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked uncertain, vulnerable. Please. I'm fat, she blurted out, and immediately wanted to kick herself. Boone blinked. What? I'm fat and plain, and I work in a kitchen, and I'm not like Vivian. I'm not beautiful or elegant or... Stop! He grabbed her shoulders, his bandaged hands gentle but firm. Do you think I care about any of that? Everyone cares about that. I don't. His voice was fierce now. You want to know what I see when I look at you? I see the woman who makes exhausted cowboys remember why they're alive. I see someone who carries dying children through storms and doesn't ask for thanks. I see the strongest person I've ever met, and yeah, you're beautiful too, but that's not why I love you. Then why? Because you have more courage in your little finger than most men have in their whole body. Because you make this place feel like home instead of just a ranch. Because when you smile at me over the dishes, I feel like maybe I'm worth something after all. His thumbs brushed her shoulders. Because you're you, Selena, and that's more than enough. The tears spilled over then, hot and fast down her cheeks. I love you too, she whispered. I've loved you since you washed dishes that first night. Maybe even before that. Boone's face broke into a smile she'd never seen before, real and unguarded and full of something that looked like joy. Yeah? Yeah. He pulled her against him, wrapping his arms around her like she was something precious. And Selena let herself sink into his warmth. She could feel his heart beating against her ear, steady and strong, and for the first time in her life, she didn't feel like she was too much or not enough. She just felt right. They stood like that until the barn cat meowed irritably at their feet, demanding dinner. Boone laughed. An actual laugh, deep and genuine, and pulled back just enough to look at her. I'm not good at this, he admitted. The romance stuff. Saying the right things. You just told me you loved me in a barn. I think you're doing fine. I'm serious. I don't know how to be someone's whatever this is. Neither do I. Selena touched his face, feeling the rough stubble under her palm. But we can figure it out together. Together. He tested the word like it was new. I like that. Good. Because you're stuck with me now. Best news I've heard all year. He kissed her then, soft and careful, like she might break, and Selena felt something inside her chest crack open and bloom. It wasn't like the books she'd read or the stories she'd heard. It was better, messier, more real. When they finally pulled apart, Boone was grinning like a fool, and Selena probably looked the same. I should get back to the kitchen, she said, not moving. Probably. The men will be wanting dinner soon. Probably. Neither of them moved. Boone? Yeah? Thank you for choosing me. His expression turned serious. Selena, there was never a choice. It was always you. Later that evening, when the men filed in for dinner, they took one look at Boone and Selena and immediately started grinning. About damn time, Carter announced to the room at large. Took you long enough, Hank agreed. Even Jesse was smiling. Does this mean you're staying forever now? Selena looked at Boone, who was watching her with that expression she'd finally learned to read, the one that said she was his whole world. Yeah, she said. I think it does. The cheering was loud enough to rattle the windows, but that night, after the dishes were done and the men had dispersed to the bunkhouses, Boone found Selena standing on the porch, staring at the stars. You okay? He asked, coming to stand beside her. I keep thinking this is a dream, that I'm going to wake up and still be in that cabin in Black Hollow, alone and invisible. You were never invisible. Not to me. I was to everyone else. Then everyone else is blind. He took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. You changed everything, Selena. This place, these men, me, and I don't know what I did to deserve you walking into my life, but I'm not letting you go. What if I get it wrong? What if I'm not good enough at this? At what? Being loved? He turned her to face him. There's no wrong way to do this. We just try. And when we mess up, because we will mess up, we figure it out and keep going. You make it sound simple. Maybe it is simple. Maybe we just spent so long thinking we weren't allowed to be happy that we forgot it could be. Selena leaned into him, letting his warmth chase away the last of her doubts. I'm still scared. Me too. He kissed the top of her head. But I'm more scared of losing you than I am of trying. They stood like that until the cold drove them inside, and when Boone walked her to her door, he kissed her goodnight with a tenderness that made her believe in second chances. The next morning, Selena woke up to find a small wildflower on her windowsill, the first of the season, barely bloomed. She smiled and tucked it behind her ear before heading to the kitchen. Boone was already there, starting the fire in the stove. You're up early, she said. Couldn't sleep. Kept thinking about you. Good thoughts, I hope. The best. He straightened and looked at her, really looked at her, with an expression that still made her breath catch. Morning, Selena. Morning, Boone. And just like that, the day started, familiar and new at the same time. Over the next few weeks, things shifted in small but significant ways. Boone still washed dishes beside her every night, but now he'd steal kisses between plates. The men still ate 3 meals a day, but they'd taken to giving Boone and Selena knowing looks whenever they stood too close. Dakota watched it all with the quiet wisdom of a child who understood more than he let on. One evening, he climbed into Selena's lap during the quiet hour after dinner. Are you and Boone married now? He asked. Selena nearly choked on her coffee. What? No, we care about each other. That sounds like married. It's more complicated than that. Grown-ups always say that when they want to make things harder than they are. Dakota settled more comfortably against her. I think you should get married. Then you'd be my real family. You're already my real family, sweetheart. But if you married Boone, nobody could make you leave. The words hit her harder than they should have. Is that what you're worried about? That I'll leave? Dakota nodded against her shoulder. Everyone leaves. Selena's heart broke a little. This child who'd lost so much, who'd been saved from death only to live with the fear of loss, she understood that better than most. I'm not leaving, she said firmly. Not ever. You're stuck with me, Dakota. Even if I don't marry Boone, even if everything changes, you'll always have me. I promise. You promise? I promise. He relaxed then, and Selena held him until he fell asleep, thinking about permanence and family and all the ways love could reshape a life. Boone found them like that an hour later and just stood in the doorway watching. You okay? He asked quietly. Scared I'll leave, like everyone else in his life has. You planning to? Never. Good. Boone crossed the room and sat beside them. Because I was thinking. Dangerous habit, Selena teased. He smiled. I was thinking that maybe it's time to make some things official, legal. Her heart stopped. What do you mean?
I mean adoption papers for Dakota. Make him ours for real, not just in our hearts. Boone looked at the sleeping boy, his expression soft. And maybe, eventually, marriage papers for us, if you wanted that. Are you proposing? Not yet. I'm terrible at this, remember? When I propose, I want to do it right, but I'm saying I want to, someday, when you're ready. Selena felt tears prick her eyes for what felt like the 100th time since this man had walked into her life. I'd like that, someday. Yeah? Yeah. They sat there in the warm kitchen, the three of them, and Selena realized this was what home felt like. Not a place, not a building. These people, this moment. Everything else could burn, and as long as she had this, she'd be okay. The thought was still in her head a week later when Carter came running into the kitchen, his face pale. Selena, you need to come quick. Her blood went cold. What happened? It's Jesse. Horse through him. He's hurt bad. She didn't remember running to the barn, didn't remember the men partying to let her through. All she saw was Jesse lying in the straw, his face gray with pain, his leg bent at an angle that made her stomach turn. Don't move him, she ordered. Someone get clean water and bandages. Boone, we need to stabilize that leg. For the next hour, she fell into the same focused calm that had carried her through the plague. She'd never set a broken bone before, but her mother's cookbook had a page on it, and desperation made her brave. By the time they'd splinted Jesse's leg and carried him to the bunkhouse, the boy was unconscious from pain, but his breathing was steady. Will he be okay? Dakota asked, his voice small. I think so. Selena washed blood from her hands and tried not to shake. But we need to watch him. Make sure infection doesn't set in. She spent the next 3 days at Jesse's bedside, changing bandages and forcing broth down his throat whenever he woke. Boone brought her meals she barely touched, and Dakota read to Jesse from a book of frontier stories that probably weren't helping anyone's anxiety. On the 4th day, Jesse opened his eyes and looked at her with clarity. Did I die? He asked. Not even close. Feels like I died. You broke your leg. It's going to hurt for a while. He processed that, then smiled weakly. You fixed it, though. You always fix things. I just did what needed doing. No. Jesse's voice was serious despite the pain. You do more than that. You make things better. Make us better. Selena squeezed his hand gently. Get some rest, Jesse. But after he'd fallen back asleep, she sat there thinking about his words. About the woman she'd been 6 months ago. Invisible, overlooked, convinced she had nothing to offer the world. And about the woman she was now. She didn't have all the answers, still got scared, still doubted herself more often than not. But she'd run into blizzards and fought plagues and set broken bones, and every time she'd survived, more than survived, she'd helped others survive too. Maybe that was enough. Maybe she'd always been enough, and she just needed to believe it. When she finally left Jesse's side and returned to the kitchen, Boone was waiting. He's going to be fine, she reported. I know, because you're taking care of him. Boone pulled her against him, and she melted into his warmth. You're amazing, you know that? I'm really not. Yes, you are, and one of these days I'm going to make you believe it. Selena smiled against his chest. You can try. Oh, I will. I've got the rest of my life to convince you. The rest of your life, huh? At least. He pulled back to look at her. Probably longer. And standing there in the kitchen that had become her kingdom, surrounded by the family she'd built from scratch, Selena Harrow finally started to believe that maybe, just maybe, she'd been worth loving all along. Summer came to the mountains like an apology, washing away the last traces of ash and snow with warm rain and wildflowers that turned the valley into something out of a painting. Jesse healed slowly, his limp a permanent reminder of the accident, but he was alive and ornery as ever, which Carter said was a good sign. The ranch settled into a rhythm that felt almost peaceful. Cattle grazed fat on new grass. Fences stayed mended. The men worked hard but laughed harder, and the kitchen became the beating heart of everything. The place where stories were told and problems were solved and life happened in all its messy, beautiful chaos. Selena had been at Callahan Ranch for 8 months when the letter arrived. It came on a Tuesday afternoon with a supply wagon from town, addressed to her in handwriting she didn't recognize. She opened it standing by the stove, flour dusting her hands, and read words that made her heart stop. "What is it?" Boone asked, watching her face go pale. "It's from Black Hollow, from Mrs. Pritchard at the general store." Selena's voice was barely a whisper. "My cabin burned down last week. Everything's gone." The news should have devastated her. That cabin had been her whole life once, her mother's home, her shelter, the only thing she'd owned in the world. But as she stood there staring at the letter, all she felt was a strange sense of relief. "I'm sorry," Boone said, taking the letter gently from her hands. "Don't be." Selena looked around the kitchen, at the worn workbench, the massive stove, the shelves she'd organized herself. "I haven't thought of that place as home in months. This is home now." "You sure?" "Completely." She took the letter back and folded it carefully. "That cabin was where I survived. This ranch is where I'm alive. There's a difference." Boone pulled her close and kissed her forehead. "You know what that means, though." "What?" "You can't leave even if you wanted to. You're officially stuck here." "Tragic," Selena said, smiling into his shirt. But that night, alone in her room, she thought about the girl she'd been in that smoke-filled cabin, small and scared and certain she'd die invisible. And she thought about the woman she'd become, the one who could look at her past burning down and feel nothing but gratitude for the future ahead. Change was terrifying, but staying the same was worse. The proposal came 3 weeks later, on a Thursday evening when the sky was turning purple and gold over the mountains. Selena was in the kitchen, as usual, kneading dough for the next morning's bread. The men had already dispersed to the bunkhouses, and Dakota was asleep in his small room off the main house, the one they'd built for him in May, with a real bed and a window that looked out over the valley. She didn't hear Boone come in, didn't realize he was there until he spoke. "Selena." She turned, wiping flour on her apron, and found him standing in the doorway, looking more nervous than she'd ever seen him. His hair was damp from washing, and he was wearing his good shirt, the one he saved for trips to town. "What's wrong?" she asked immediately. "Nothing's wrong. He ran a hand through his hair, making it stick up. "I've been trying to figure out how to do this right. Practiced what I'd say. Even asked Carter for advice, which was a mistake because he's useless." "Do what right?" Boone crossed the room in 3 strides and took her floury hands in his. "I told you once I wanted to do this properly, that when I proposed, I'd get it right." Selena's heart started hammering. "Boone, let me finish, please." He took a breath. "I'm not good with words. Never have been. But I know what I want, and I want you. Not just as my cook or my whatever we've been calling this. I want you as my wife, my partner, the person I wake up next to for the rest of my life." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring, simple gold, no stones, the kind meant for working hands. "It's not fancy," he said, "and I'm not fancy. This ranch isn't fancy, but it's real, and it's ours if you want it. If you want me." His voice cracked slightly. "Will you marry me, Selena?" She was crying before she could stop herself, tears cutting tracks through the flour dust on her face. "You practice this?" "Terribly, apparently, since you're crying." "I'm crying because I'm happy, you impossible man." "So, is that a yes?" "Yes." She threw her arms around his neck, nearly knocking them both over. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times, yes." Boone lifted her off her feet and spun her around, laughing in a way she'd never heard before, pure and unguarded and full of joy. When he set her down, he slipped the ring on her finger. It fit perfectly. "How did you know my size?" she asked. "Asked Dakota to trace your hand while you were sleeping. You enlisted a child in your proposal scheme?" He was very enthusiastic about it. Boone kissed her, soft and sweet. "Besides, he's been asking when we're getting married since April. Smart kid. The smartest." They stood there in the kitchen, holding each other while the bread dough rose forgotten on the counter, and Selena thought about how strange life was. 6 months ago, she'd been nobody, nothing. And now she was engaged to a man who looked at her like she'd hung the stars, standing in a kitchen she'd claimed as her own, part of a family she'd built from scratch. The wedding happened 6 weeks later on a Sunday afternoon in late August. They kept it simple. No fancy dress, no elaborate decorations, just Selena in a blue cotton dress that Hank's wife had helped her sew, and Boone in his good suit that he'd had to have the sleeves let out because his shoulders were too broad for store-bought. The ceremony took place on the ridge overlooking the valley, with the whole ranch in attendance. Carter stood up as Boone's best man, looking uncomfortable in clothes that weren't work-worn. Dakota held the rings with the solemnity of someone entrusted with the fate of nations. The circuit preacher kept it short, which everyone appreciated, and when he pronounced them husband and wife, the cheering could probably be heard in 3 counties. Boone kissed her in front of everyone, thorough and unashamed, and Selena felt her face burn but didn't pull away. This was her life now. This man. This family. This impossible, beautiful, terrifying future. The celebration afterward was rowdy and perfect. The men had barbecued 2 whole steers and contributed enough whiskey to float a boat. Someone produced a fiddle, and dancing broke out despite the fact that half the ranch hands had 2 left feet. Selena found herself passed from partner to partner. Carter, who apologized every time he stepped on her feet. Hank, who was surprisingly graceful for his size. Even Jesse, limping gamely through a simple waltz. But it was Boone who pulled her away from the crowd as the sun started to set, leading her to the porch of the main house where they could watch the party from a distance. Happy? He asked, deliriously. No regrets? She looked at him, this scarred, stubborn, impossibly good man who'd seen something in her that she hadn't seen in herself. Not a single one. He pulled her close, and they swayed to music that was more enthusiasm than skill, watching their family celebrate below. I love you, Boone said against her hair. In case I don't say it enough. You say it plenty. I'll say it more anyway. Good. They stayed like that until Dakota came running up the steps, his face flushed with excitement. Can I call you Ma now? He asked Selena breathlessly. She felt something crack open in her chest. You want to? Yeah, if that's okay. Selena knelt down to his level, not caring that her nice dress was getting dirty. It's more than okay, sweetheart. I'd be honored. Dakota launched himself into her arms with enough force to knock her backward. Boone caught them both, laughing, and pulled them into a hug that felt like coming home. We're a family now, Dakota announced, his voice muffled against Selena's shoulder. A real one. We always were, Selena said. But yeah, it's official now. That night, after the party wound down and the ranch hands stumbled off to their bunks, Selena and Boone stood on the porch and watched stars emerge over the mountains. You know what I realized today? Selena said. What? A year ago, I would have bet everything I had that I'd die alone in that cabin, that nobody would come to my funeral except maybe Mrs. Pritchard, and only because she'd want to make sure I was really dead. Selena, let me finish. She squeezed his hand. I spent so long believing I wasn't worth loving that I almost missed out on this. On you, on all of it. And I keep thinking about other women out there who feel the way I used to feel. Invisible. Unworthy. Like they're taking up too much space just by existing. Where are you going with this? I want to do something about it. Open the kitchen to travelers. Feed people who need feeding. Show them that kindness exists, even in rough places. She looked up at him. Is that crazy? No. Boone's voice was soft. It's the least crazy thing I've ever heard. You sure? It'll mean more work, more expense. Selena, this ranch makes enough to support what you're talking about. And even if it didn't, he turned her to face him. You saved this place. These men. Me. If you want to save a few more people, I'm not going to stop you. I love you, she said fiercely. I love you too. The kitchen opened to travelers the following month. It started small, a sign at the crossroads pointing weary riders toward Callahan Ranch, where a hot meal and a warm bed were available for those who needed it. Word spread slowly at first, then faster. Drifters, merchants, families moving west. They all started showing up at the kitchen door, hungry and hopeful. Selena fed them all. She made rules because you had to have rules. Wash your hands before eating, no fighting, no stealing, everyone helps with dishes. But beyond that, the kitchen was open. Free for those who couldn't pay, affordable for those who could. Some nights, 20 people packed around the long tables. Cowboys sat next to merchants, miners next to preachers. Everyone united by the smell of Selena's cooking and the warmth of her welcome. The ranch hands grumbled at first about the extra work, but even they came around when they saw what it meant. Young men found jobs. Lost travelers found directions. Hungry children found full bellies and hope, and Selina found her purpose. She'd been at it for 3 months when a young woman showed up at the door one cold November evening. She was maybe 20, heavy-set and plain, with a black eye and a carpet bag that held everything she owned. "Is it true?" the woman asked, her voice barely a whisper. "That you feed people here, even if they can't pay?" "It's true," Selina said. "Come in." The woman sat at the table and ate like she hadn't seen food in days. Probably hadn't. When she finished, she looked up at Selina with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she said. "I was starting to think nobody cared if I lived or died." Selina sat down across from her. "What's your name?" "Anna." "Well, Anna, I care, and you're welcome to stay as long as you need." "I don't have any money." "Didn't ask for money. Asked if you needed help." Anna started crying in earnest then, and Selina let her because sometimes that's what people needed most. Someone to witness their pain and not turn away. Anna stayed for 2 weeks, helping in the kitchen and slowly coming back to life. When she left, it was with a job offer from a family in town who needed a seamstress, and a letter of recommendation from Selina that praised her skills and character. "You saved my life," Anna said the morning she left. "No," Selina said. "You saved your own life. I just gave you a place to rest while you did it." But after Anna rode away, Selina stood on the porch and thought about the woman she'd been a year ago, the one who believed she had nothing to offer. And she thought about all the Annas out there, waiting for someone to tell them they mattered. That's when she decided to write it down. She started that evening, sitting at the kitchen table after everyone had gone to bed, with paper and pencil and words that came easier than she expected. She wrote about survival and kindness and the strength it took to keep going when the world told you to give up. She wrote about winter and storms and the way warmth could save a life. She wrote about love, not the easy kind from storybooks, but the real kind that showed up in dirty boots and washed dishes and chose you every single day. When she finished 3 hours later, she had a letter, not to anyone in particular, just to whoever needed to read it. She showed it to Boone the next morning. He read it slowly, his scarred fingers tracing the words, and when he looked up, his eyes were suspiciously bright. "This is good," he said hoarsely. "You think so? I think you need to send copies to every young woman who comes through that kitchen. I think you need to mail it to churches and schools and anywhere else lost girls might find it." He set the letter down carefully. "I think you just wrote something that's going to change lives, Selina. It's just a letter. It's more than that. It's proof that people like you exist, that kindness wins, that the world doesn't have to be cruel." He pulled her into his arms. "I'm so damn proud of you." Selina buried her face in his chest and tried not to cry. Again. She seemed to cry a lot these days, but they were good tears, the kind that came from being so full of happiness you had to let some of it out. The letter spread faster than she anticipated. Women who came through the kitchen asked for copies to take with them. Preachers read it from pulpits. Teachers shared it with students. Within 6 months, Selina was getting letters back from women who said her words had given them courage, had reminded them they weren't alone, had changed their lives. One letter came from a girl in Nebraska who said she'd been planning to end her life until she read Selina's words about storms passing and spring coming. "She was still alive," she wrote, "and that was because of you." Selina kept that letter in her pocket for a week, reading it whenever doubt crept in. "You're making a difference," Boone told her one evening as they sat on the porch watching sunset paint the mountains gold. "I'm just writing letters. You're saving lives. There's a difference." Maybe he was right. Selina didn't know, but she kept writing anyway, because what else was she supposed to do with this second chance she'd been given? Waste it? Hide it? Pretend she hadn't been exactly where those lost women were? No, she'd use it, every bit of it. The first anniversary of their wedding arrived on a warm August evening that felt like a gift. Boone surprised her by closing the kitchen for the night, the first time it had been closed since opening, and taking her up to the ridge where they'd gotten married. He'd packed a basket with bread and cheese and wine, spread a blanket under the stars, and pulled her down beside him. "A whole year," he said, pouring wine into 2 tin cups. "You regret it yet?" Selina teased. "Every single day." He grinned at her expression. "I regret not doing it sooner." She shoved his shoulder. "You're terrible." "You married me anyway." "Worst decision of my life." "Liar." They laughed and drank wine and watched the sky turn from blue to purple to black. And Selena thought about everything that had happened in 12 months. The kitchen, the travelers, the letters. Dakota calling her ma without hesitation. Waking up every morning next to a man who loved her exactly as she was. "I'm pregnant," she said suddenly. Boone choked on his wine. "What?" "I'm pregnant. About 3 months, I think. I wasn't sure, but..." She touched her stomach. "I'm sure now." He stared at her, his face cycling through shock, joy, terror, and back to joy. "You're serious?" "Completely. We're having a baby. We're having a baby." Boone set down his cup very carefully, then pulled her into his arms so tightly she could barely breathe. "A baby," he repeated, his voice rough. "Our baby." "Are you happy?" Selena asked against his shoulder. "Happy?" "Selena, I'm..." He pulled back to look at her, and his face was wet with tears he didn't bother hiding. "I'm terrified and thrilled, and I can't believe this is real, that you're real, that any of this is real." "It's real." "Yeah." He touched her face gently. "It's real." They stayed on the ridge until the stars filled the sky like spilled salt, making plans and dreaming out loud about a future that kept getting bigger and better and more impossible to believe. The baby, a girl, arrived the following April on a morning when the valley was drowning in wildflowers. The labor was long and brutal, the kind that made Selena understand why her mother had only had one child. But when the midwife from town finally placed a squalling, red-faced infant in her arms, Selena forgot every minute of pain. "She's perfect," Boone whispered, touching the baby's tiny hand with one scarred finger. "She's wrinkled and angry," Selena said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Perfect," Boone insisted. They named her Rose, after the wildflowers that covered the mountains in spring. Rose Callahan, born into a world that would try to tell her she wasn't enough, but raised by people who would teach her otherwise. Dakota, now 9 years old and desperately trying to act mature, declared himself the baby's official protector. He took the job seriously, standing guard outside Selena's room and glaring at anyone who got too close. "She's my sister," he announced to Carter when the old cowboy tried to peek in. "You can't see her unless Ma says so." Carter grinned. "Yes, sir." The ranch transformed around the new addition. Rough cowboys became gentle giants, cooing at the baby and offering to hold her with hands more used to ropes and brandings. Hank carved a cradle. Jesse made a mobile from twisted wire and painted wood. Even the horses seemed quieter, as if they understood something precious had joined their world. Selena watched it all from her bed, exhausted and sore and happier than she'd ever been, and thought about the woman she'd been 2 years ago. That woman wouldn't have believed this life was possible, wouldn't have trusted it if offered, would have sabotaged it out of fear and old wounds and the bone-deep certainty that happiness wasn't meant for people like her. But that woman was gone, left behind in a burned cabin in Black Hollow, buried under ash and snow and everything else that used to define her. This woman, Selena Callahan, wife and mother and keeper of the kitchen that fed the lost, this woman knew better. She knew that love wasn't earned through perfection, that strength came in forms the world didn't always recognize, that the women everyone underestimated were often the ones who changed everything. And she knew, with absolute certainty, that she would spend the rest of her life making sure other women learned the same lessons. 5 years later, on a spring morning that smelled like rain and new grass, Selena stood in her kitchen and looked around at the organized chaos. Rose, now 4, was helping make bread by throwing flour everywhere. Dakota, 13 and shooting up like a weed, was supposed to be chopping vegetables but kept sneaking bites when he thought Selena wasn't looking. 2 travelers, a mother and daughter heading west, sat at the table eating breakfast and talking quietly about their plans. Boone came in from the morning's work, kissed Selena thoroughly despite their audience, and stole a piece of bacon off the stove. "How many for lunch?" he asked. 15 ranch hands, these 2, and probably a few more if that wagon train passes through like the last letter said. "You need help?" "Always." He rolled up his sleeves without complaint, because that's what partners did. And as they worked side by side, chopping and stirring and laughing when Rose tried to eat raw dough, Selena thought about all the versions of herself she'd been. The invisible girl in Black Hollow, the terrified cook who arrived at a mountain ranch, the woman who learned to love, the wife, the mother, The writer who sent letters to lost souls and hoped the words would help. She'd been all of them. Was still all of them, in a way. The fear didn't disappear just because you found happiness. The old wounds didn't heal completely just because new love covered them. But you learned to carry them, to use them, to let them make you kinder instead of harder.
Ma, Rose said, tugging on Selena's skirt, can I have a cookie? After lunch. But I'm hungry now. Then eat some vegetables. Rose wrinkled her nose exactly like Boone did. Vegetables are yucky. Vegetables are food. You want to grow big and strong like your brother? Yes. Then eat vegetables. The logic was flawless. Rose ate a carrot with great reluctance, then wandered off to pester Dakota. Selena caught Boone watching her with that expression she knew so well now, the one that said she was his whole world. What? She asked. Just thinking about how lucky I am. You're such a sap. Only for you. He pulled her close despite the travelers watching, despite the work waiting, despite everything, and kissed her like they were the only two people in the world. And maybe, for that moment, they were.
That evening, after the travelers had moved on and the ranch hands had dispersed and the children were asleep, Selena sat down to write another letter. This one was to a young woman in Montana who'd written asking for advice about leaving an abusive husband. Selena's hand shook slightly as she wrote, because this mattered. These words mattered. The way she crafted them could mean the difference between a woman finding courage or staying trapped. So she wrote carefully, honestly, about fear and survival and the terrifying leap it took to choose yourself when everyone said you were being selfish, about how leaving didn't make you weak, it made you brave, about how starting over was possible, even when it felt impossible. She wrote about storms and spring and the way life could surprise you if you gave it the chance. When she finished, she sealed the envelope and set it aside for tomorrow's mail wagon. Then she sat back and looked around at the kitchen that had become her kingdom. This room had seen everything. Tears and laughter, births and deaths, strangers becoming family and family becoming home. It had witnessed a woman learning to believe in herself, one burned batch of bread and one saved life at a time. And it would witness more, years more, a lifetime more, because this was what legacy looked like. Not grand gestures or fame or fortune, just a kitchen that stayed warm, a door that stayed open, and a woman who refused to let anyone feel as invisible as she once had. Boone found her there an hour later, still sitting at the table, lost in thought. "You okay?" he asked. "Yeah." Selena smiled up at him. "Just thinking about how far we've come. We've come pretty far, and how much further we have to go." He pulled her to her feet and wrapped his arms around her. "Wherever we're going together. Promise?" "Promise." They stood like that in the quiet kitchen, holding each other while the mountains stood watch outside and the stars turned overhead, and Selena felt the truth settle into her bones. She had been the woman nobody chose, the one people overlooked and underestimated and dismissed, but she'd chosen herself. And in doing so, she'd built something that mattered, not just a home or a family or a kitchen that fed the lost. She'd built proof that the world was wrong about her, wrong about all the women like her, the heavy ones, the plain ones, the ones who took up space and apologized for existing, the ones who believed their worth was measured by how little room they occupied and how quietly they moved through life. They were wrong, and Selena would spend the rest of her life making sure every woman who walked through her door knew it. Because love wasn't earned through beauty or perfection. Strength didn't come from being small. Worth wasn't determined by the people who refused to see it. Real love came from kindness. Real strength came from courage. Real worth came from the inside where the world couldn't touch it. And in the harsh wilderness of the frontier, where survival was everything and tenderness was rare, Selena had learned that kindness wasn't weakness. It was the greatest strength of all.